Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Good to see you all. Still reporting to you live from the woods of Mendocino County. And very grateful to be here. It's very grateful to be in nature. Feel a little closer to the source. And it's a gift to be able to study Torah in nature. It's a gift to be able to do this thing that usually requires an urban setting. That's why, Jews have had to be so urban, as we have to gather together so we can do our thing. And it's nice to be isolated and still doing our thing. Okay. We are this week, it's just like too much to deal with, because this week is a combo parsha. It's Acharei Mot-Kedoshim. Those are two massive parshot that sometimes get read together. Last week we read Tazria Mitzora, and that worked because they're both shorter parshot that are all discussing the laws of purity and impurity, and that so it all fits together. And actually, there's some debate about whether certain parshot actually were originally together, Vayakel Pekude, Truma Tetzave. But then there are others that, because of our calendrical concerns, we read together because we just have to catch up because it's a longer or a shorter year. We have a leap month in the Jewish calendar, where 7 of 19 years has an extra month. Anyway, that's complicated, but the point is sometimes we have to read a lot and it feels like too much. And this week is one of those weeks because Acharei Mot, let's just honor it for a second because then we're going to leave it. Acharei Mot, meaning after the death of, deals with the aftermath after the death of Aaron's 2 sons. And that in itself is to return to that scene is a difficult and a heavy, just trying to get right in this chair here, moment. And then we go straight into the Yom Kippur service, the elaborate detail of the Yom Kippur service with the 2 goats. And maybe this is why it does make sense to join Acharei Mot with Parshat Kedoshim. Then we start to get into laws at the end of Acharei Mot. It's laws of around sexuality and forbidden relationships, incest, and things like that. And because the laws are starting to come one after another, this is sort of the beginning of what academics call the holiness code. But it's really, that holiness code is really recognizable in the second of our compressed parshot today, Parshat Kedoshim, which means holiness, or literally Kedoshim to you. You should be holy. You all should be holy. And so that's where the code gets its name. You all should be holy. And it does seem like a lot of these laws are interested in holiness, but it's actually strange, the holiness code, because many of them do not seem to be dealing with holiness per se. Now, I say that because it's important to see how this legal code suddenly raises its head up in the middle of Leviticus, which has indeed been concerned with holiness. Holiness, you might say, is the theme of Leviticus, to approach the mikdash, the sanctuary, the holy space. The priest is designated, is sanctified. All of the laws of purity and impurity are to keep us in a state of ability to approach the holy. Holiness is certainly a concern here in the book of Leviticus, but in Parshat Kedoshim especially, although, as I said, it's already begun in Parshat Acharei Mot, Parshat Kedoshim, all of a sudden we start to get these laws one after another, and they don't all seem like they're about ritual holiness. In fact, it's just a legal code, the holiness code. And it has all kinds of laws that are the sort of thing we would expect from the book of Exodus, from Mishpatim, from the covenant code, from a code that thinks about human society and justice and how we live together and treat each other with principles of mishpat, of justice. Okay, so that's just a big deal in itself, because it suddenly seems like this book that you could have written off as, oh, this is priestly stuff, we don't do this anymore. Actually, this book is concerned with how we live. And part of what this book is trying to say is that everything that goes on in the temple, that's one mode of accessing holiness, but we can also access holiness through our behavior, in ourselves, in our bodies, in our societies, between each other. We can conduct ourselves with holiness, and that's why the code opens, Kedoshim to you, you be holy. Ki kadosh ani, because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Okay, so that's a big move in itself. Now, we arrive at Parshat Kedoshim, at the holiness code, and it's a wonderful section of the Torah, because it's just one law after another, but they're some of the all-time classics. I mean, maybe the all-time classic, Ve'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's here in the holiness code. Okay, so think about what that says. Loving your neighbor as yourself is a way of accessing holiness, or acting holy. Okay, so it's that sort of, and it's one law after another, and some of them are about the poor, and some of them are about holy things like Shabbat. But it's a catalog of laws that has this framework of holiness. And it's just a wonderful thing to kind of wander around this catalog, because every one of these laws we could spend, there's just no shortage of material. We could spend an entire class on any one of these laws, and that's what we're going to do today. So that's all by way of saying we're just going to dip into the holiness code and look carefully at one or two of its sections, and try to flesh out a little bit what's going on here, what is the ethic and the law, and then what it has to do with holiness. And the laws that we're going to look at today are both speech laws that dictate how we speak. But they're two very different laws. We're going to spend most of our time looking at the laws around what we call lashon hara, evil speech. And then also we're going to look a little bit at the laws of tochacha, rebuke. Okay, and they come right after another. Okay, but I'm already giving away too much. So let's stop. Let's take a break to say a blessing. Thank God for this constant reminder to enter into holiness through our behavior, through the way we live. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. You have no idea what I'm looking at right now, so it's just like, oh, God. Okay. Okay, so let's begin. Here is the verse that we are going to spend the most time on, and most of our time on today, is this verse right here. Let's see. I'll put it in the chat. It's Leviticus chapter 19, which is the beginning of Parshat Kedoshim, verse 16. And I got to say, one of the things that is so wonderful and rich in the Torah is that much of the Torah is made of law, is legal, but even the legal, and sometimes people don't like, well, get me back to the stories, but actually even the legal sections have a real poetry to them. They are really written sometimes very clearly with cadence in mind. What I just said, ve'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, like that, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Just the sound of it is a kind of chant or rhythm, and that's true with a lot of the laws that we see in Parsha Kedoshim, and it's true for the laws that we're going to look at today. Just even the sound of the verse is a kind of, there's a kind of epithet yeah, this is meant to be a kind of saying as much as it is a law. Okay, so let's take a look here at what will become one of the most important laws in Jewish life and thought, though it only gets mentioned very, very briefly here. In fact, it doesn't even take up the whole sentence. It doesn't even take up the whole verse. So let's take a look here. Okay. Moving things around in my Zoom screen. Here I am. Okay. Okay. Lo telech rachil ba'amecha, lo tamod al dam re'echa, ani Hashem. Let me say that again. Lo telech rachil ba'amecha, lo tamod al dam re'echa, ani Hashem. Oh, this says do. All right, so that's the type of do not go talebearing about your people. Do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. And then this is a kind of a refrain which we see a lot in Parsha Kedoshim. It comes up again and again, law after law. There's a kind of punctuation. I am God. I am Hashem. I am the eternal. Ani Hashem. And what that means is a topic for another class. Rashi says it means like like I'm the one who's going to be watching over you if you do and I will pay you reward or punishment based on what you do. But that's just who knows? It's certainly that's a good way of saying that there's a gravity here. Like what I just said is important. I'm God who said it. Okay. Now, I want to immediately do one thing, which is just, this is the familiar translation, tale-bearing. I want to translate it today as gossiping, and we'll soon try to prove that it is gossiping. But tale-bearing is such an unused word today, but gossiping is such a big word today. It's such a big word, and I really think this is a massive topic in Jewish thought, as I said, but I think we really, really need to think about it in our time. I really do. I really think that we are, and I am including myself among we for sure, but I think we are struggling with a lot of the questions that emerge out of this this prohibition, because we live in a gossiping. First of all, just because we're human beings, and that's just the way it is. And this opens up a huge discussion in first of all, rabbinic literature, the Talmud. The rabbis were obsessed with, even though this is a one tiny law, the rabbis kept coming back to it and kept coming back to it, and they kind of grew over the centuries. It's like, no, this is really the problem. And I feel that to a certain extent myself on Yom Kippur, right? You know, when you're like going through all the sins, and most of them don't even apply to you, and you're like, yes, I didn't kill anyone this year. And then you see, you know, gossiping, speaking, you know, chattering about other people, speaking ill of other people. And every year my chest hurts a little bit, because I just know I did that again this year, willingly, happily, delightedly, right? Like so part of this is just, it's a human thing, and it's, the Torah is asking us to do something, I think, that's pretty unnatural, which is not to chatter about each other. We'll get into what that means, but let's just leave it at like gossip. The Torah is asking us not to gossip, and that's a lot. I mean, I don't know who likes gossiping. You know what I mean? There are gossip columns. There are now gossip websites and networks, and and that's where it moves from just a human problem to just a problem of our time, because part of what I want to try to think about together with you today is the public conversation and what ought to happen in the public conversation. Okay, there's lots to say here, but I'm gonna leapfrog over centuries and centuries of discussion and processing of this topic and take us to the person that really we should be listening to when we enter into this topic, and that is Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, the Chafetz Chaim, they call him. The Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim, they call him the Chafetz Chaim by his the name of his book. Chafetz Chaim means the one who desires life, and that's taken from a verse in the Psalms. But the book is a book, it's really the first major work devoted exclusively to the laws of Lashon Hara, of evil speech. Okay, so now who was the Chafetz Chaim? He was born in the Russian Empire and died in Poland, so Eastern European scholar born in the 19th century, 1838, and lived into the 20th century. And we know him probably best at this point for his commentary on a part of the Shulchan Aruch, of the Code of Jewish Law, called the Mishnah Brura. The Mishnah Brura is a very famous commentary. But actually, maybe it's not, maybe we don't know him best from there, because in some ways he's known best for though he wrote a commentary on a lot of Jewish law, that's the Mishnah Brura, this book is entirely devoted to this question of how we follow the laws of not speaking evilly, speaking ill, speaking badly, Lashon Hara. Now, all we've mentioned so far, you may be thinking, wait a minute, all we've mentioned so far is gossip. Oh, evil speech. We'll get there, but the verse that mentions gossip is the one that triggers the whole conversation. Okay, let me just give you a sense of Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, the Chafetz Chaim, was the guy to write this book, because he was like by all accounts, there's a lot of how do you say this? Hagiography, I think you say. You valorize and talk about the holiness of people of previous generations. But this guy's only lived, 100 years ago, and by all accounts, he was just an incredibly pious man, just a righteous little tzaddik of the first order, and just very pious in all the ways that word connotes, like sort of obsessive about living at the highest level of righteousness, or in fact, I might say, given our theme for today, holiness. Very humble, ran a shop for much of his life, just like while he was one of the most brilliant legal thinkers in Jewish legal thinkers in Europe. And then eventually a school started to gather around him, and he wrote these books. But it's this book, the Chafetz Chaim, where he really goes to town on the sin of Lashon Hara. Just to give you a sense of, through his voice, he's like the epitome of this voice in the tradition, but it's a voice that has been building for centuries. Take a look at what he says about the sin of Lashon Hara. And if we carefully searched our ways, which of the sins have primarily caused the length of our exile? Okay, this is a wild thing to say, right? The length of our exile. This is before the new state of Israel. 2,000 years wandering the world. He's sitting there in Europe, and he's saying, what's the real problem? Why are we still here? We would find them to be many, but the sin of Lashon Hara, evil speech, above all. Above all. Okay? Now, that's already quite a startling thing to say. Lashon Hara is the greatest sin, the one that that caused the exile. Now, he has some interesting, we're not going to stay here for too long. I want to take us into some of the definitions. What is evil speech? But he has some interesting proofs for that theory. Many passages in the Talmud that describe the fall of the temple as taking place due to sinat chinam, baseless hatred, which is not exactly the same thing, but a lot of stories about infighting and feuding among the people of Israel, right? The fast of Gedaliah marks the slaughter of a Jewish leader by another Jew. They were, I guess, Israelites, but all of the stories of the destruction of the temple and Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, I could go on and on, seem to deal with us hating each other. And maybe you could say, sort of extract from that and speaking ill of each other. And then the Chafetz Chaim has another really big proof. And here he's borrowing from rabbinic literature also, but he says, it's not well known. We don't talk about this so much, but the exile had already been decreed upon us because of the sin of the spies, as Rashi and the Ramban explain over there in Bamidbar, which is the book of Numbers. And the sin of the spies, was it not that of Lashon Hara? Therefore, it is imperative that we correct this sin before the redemption can take place. Now, that's an interesting move. The spies, we will read about later, go into the land of Israel and they speak ill of the land of Israel. No, it's a terrifying place. We shouldn't go there. And God is furious. And sort of homiletically, we say they were speaking Lashon Hara. They were speaking ill of the land. But it does say that they were they spoke dibah. They spoke this language of like rumor and spreading rumors, right? The same language, by the way, that we say that Joseph used when he spoke ill of his brothers, right? Or tattletaled on his brothers. Okay, so there is actually a narrative theme to follow here. Like maybe Lashon Hara causes feuding among the family, and then among the nation, and then among the tribe, and okay, so there's all kinds of themes we could pursue. There's one more famous scene where Miriam speaks ill of her brother Moses and is afflicted with what we talked about last week, tzarat, with leprosy. Okay, so it's a concern in the Torah, but legally it's only this one little line here. Just this one little line. It didn't even say evil speech. It just said gossip. So let's take a look at what's the difference between evil speech and gossip. And I see the hands are starting to come up. And yes, I've been talking nonstop this whole time, so I will take a breath and hear from you all. But just finally, I want to lay out 3 categories of prohibited speech. And the Chafetz Chaim, this same book, does a nice job of just sort of laying out what is the difference between gossip, evil speech, and then one other category, which is something like libel. Okay, so let's take a look. And then we'll open it up for reflection. Okay, so one who bears tales. By the way, I can't, I just can't help myself. This is too much TMI, too much information here. But the word for sins or for spies, meraglim, is the same word that the Chafetz Chaim uses for someone who bears tales, hamiragel, right? So there's some real connection there, like to go around spying on your friends. Okay, but anyway, I digress. One who bears tales or gossips against their fellow transgresses a negative commandment. Do not go gossiping about your people. Now, I said I was going to prove to you this has got to be gossiping, and the proof is, or at least if we trust the Chafetz Chaim, that his definition is, what is a rachil? What is a gossip? What is a talebearer? It's one who loads oneself with words and goes around from one to another saying, this is what Plony so-and-so said about you. And this is what I heard Plony did to you. And although what he says may be true, it destroys the world. That's quite an ending to that sentence. It destroys the world. Okay, but let's just make clear what he's saying here. The prohibition in the Torah that a rachil, lo telech rachil ba'amecha. That is someone who's, and it says, don't go gossiping. So it is that language, someone who goes around and like, do you hear this? Do you hear this? Do you hear this? Just telling stuff. It's not that it's false. It's not that it's lies. It's just a gossip. It's just like, oh, I heard this. Spreading information, spreading information. And that's forbidden. That's forbidden. Okay? So let's just think about the things that are forbidden. It is forbidden to spread that kind of gossip information, even if it's true. Category 2. However, there is a sin much greater than this. That's quite strong language, right? There's a sin much greater than the one that is explicit in the Torah, and that is Lashon Hara, and it's included here. We assume that this verse also refers to Lashon Hara, which means, again, I should this Lashon Hara is evil speech, just so we follow all what we're learning here. So rechilut or rachil is gossip. Lashon hara is evil speech, and it's included in this negative commandment, and that is speaking disparagingly of one's fellow, even if what one said is true. Okay, so that's interesting. 2 different sins, both buried in this commandment. One is not to just talk about other people. Okay, just to gossip, just to spread. Oh, do you know this? Do you know that? Hey, who's the rabbi dating? Just like spreading information around, right? But the other one is much, much worse. And that is saying, she's not so smart. Saying something negative, not just spreading information, but saying something negative, which could be true, could still be true, but that's prohibited. Evil speech is not what we sometimes think it is, spreading lies. Evil speech can very often be spreading truth. Okay, and that is prohibited. That is prohibited. Now, I'm soon going to finally stop talking and ask you a question. And the question is going to be, what's the problem with this? There's a problem with this. But let's just name our third category. Here we go. The third category, there's some debate as to where we learn this. It is maybe not learned out from this same verse, but one who speaks falsely about his friend or his fellow is referred to as a motzi shem ra, one who defames their fellow. Okay, so that's a liar. That's slander or libel, or I'm actually not even sure if I'm using the terms precisely. I knew them once, but I think that's right. I think libel is false, and no, Matt's about to jump in, but okay, we'll turn to Matt soon. But 3 categories. Categories are don't just go tale-bearing and gossiping. And that seems really hard to do, where we're not talking about other people anymore. But that's a suggestion. Be very, very careful about just telling information about other people, what you heard. Maybe it's hearsay. Maybe that's the problem, all right, the way they're describing it. Second one is saying nasty, defaming, hurtful, damaging things about other people, even if they're true. And the third one is spreading lies. Okay. All right. So I see now a row of people who are have been thinking now about the implications of these sorts of prohibitions. But I want to ask you sort of to think about the differences between the 3. Do you think all of these things ought to be prohibited? Does this make sense? Does it seem like a grave and serious sin? And if so, which of the 3 is the real problem, right? And just to state some of the obvious distinctions we could draw, well, is it really a problem if you say something true? That's really a problem? That's like 2 of the 3 categories, the ones that we really are rooting in the concept of lashon in this verse. 2 of them are true things. Okay. Okay. And then I want to repeat the question I asked a few minutes ago, which is, what's the problem with this? Like, what's, this is what is, now that I've told you, you can't talk about other people, you can't say nasty things about other people. Is anything lost? Are we okay? Is this how we should live? Okay. So, lots of people are ready to go. Matt, who is already shaking his head at me, already contradicting me. I can't wait to hear what Matt has to say.
Yeah, so first, Kate is here with me.
Hello, Kate.
We're in Florence, Italy.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
Wow, Firenze. There's really no more beautiful city in the world. I mean, there are competitors, but that is about the peak.
And I'm not saying anything, but we are slightly further away than Japan. But anyway.
Very nice. Finally won the contest. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Just like out in front every week, but yeah, you got him this week. Yeah.
I think for the Torah, the issue is that speech is incredibly powerful. Think about the fact that this chapter goes, God said to Moses, go say to the people, speech matters. The world is created in speech. God does by speech. So speech matters. And I think I would almost say that the small true things are almost, or maybe as bad, because they're small things. You've got this great, big, powerful thing. It creates law. It creates the world. Don't turn it into insignificant triviality. So I think that's what's going on in Torah about that. Yeah. That's what I really had to say there.
Good. First of all, that's like, those are the big picture, like 10,000 feet comments that sometimes we have to wait to the end. So thank you, Matt, for bringing us right to the heart of the matter. Right, that's right. When we talk about speech in Jewish tradition, we're immediately in grand theological territory, because the world was created with speech. So the significance of speech there is always weighty. And I like, so you say, and even the little things, I as you talk, I can't help but go back, and we're going to look at this in depth soon. But remember the other end of the verse: do not go gossiping about your people, and do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. There's something, I talked about the poetry of the language. There's something strange about that the fact that there's the second half of the verse is to not kill, not to allow bloodshed. And so maybe there's some suggestion already there that.
But blood and breath are the two critical things, always. Blood and breath, it governs our food rules, so the fact that they go from speaking to blood just makes sense to me.
Cool. Okay. Noah.
Yeah, this is a very interesting sociological issue that now we're getting like the more defined area of what we're not supposed to do, given in the Ten Commandments, and the last one that we're not supposed to covet our neighbor's property and all the other neighbor things. And this one, it's even with the truth that we're not supposed to say, like, hey, I heard that Joe was a really nice guy, but X, Y, and Z. That we're not supposed to show these negative or positive truths. It's rumor mongering. And then there's the flip side, the falsehoods about them. But it's really just even wanting to spread a positive, it's spreading information about others, I guess, with or without their consent. I once learned that gossip hurts three people: the hearer, the teller, and the person it's about. And really caring about the reputation of the person. That the reputation I'm seeing is the blood that's being spilled while they're standing idly.
Good. Okay, good. This is exactly where the sort of centuries of commentary on and expansion on this log goes, is to think about the ways in which, yeah, I actually should take that verse literally. To gossip is to shed blood in a certain way, and some of the rabbis say that because you are when you take a person's reputation down, you take away their livelihood, you take away their ability to live, you lower them you can actually ruin someone with words. So it is a very serious thing. It is actually something that causes not just emotional harm in the world, but real, actual harm in the world. Okay, so that's part of the gravity of it. Joni, Brenner?
Thank you. A few things I wanted to ask you. I think one of the problems is, do I get pleasure in the gossip? I think that's a piece of it. And the other thing that I sort of wanted to ask you about, it seems that I have a responsibility to my community, so that if there is a teacher that I know acted a certain way in the Bronx and had to leave the school, and now this teacher is going to Berkeley, and and it's true. There's a police report, and we're talking about Hebrew school. We're talking about kids, and I in our Mussar tradition, we also have a responsibility to reproach. So I'm not living alone in the world, so this is very challenging, because he's saying even when it's true. And just to further kind of say that is that we rely on recommendations. We rely on somebody's applying to be the new rabbi. We want to hear from the kahal where she has come from, and we want to know about what does the community say about this person. Is she can especially, we've got the rabbi's fund, we've got discretion. So there's a tremendous responsibility that I have if I'm in a community and something is untoward, how to work that within.
Okay, great. That, Joni, bless you. That was so incredible. It just cutting right to the heart of the matter here, and taking our conversation a big step forward. Because I think, you started to talk about the question of whether you're getting pleasure out of it, or you're doing it for some other reason. And you'll see that exact consideration. We're about to see that exact consideration in the writing of the Chafetz Chaim, because you asked the essential question here. Really, the critical question. It's so easy to say, don't speak ill of people. Right? It's hard to do, but it's easy to say, yeah, that's bad. You'd be nice. But wait a minute. There are forms of speech, even speech that denounces and denigrates someone, that are necessary. And you named some of the important ones. I have a guy starting a chainsaw outside, so let me just, do you hear that? No, you don't hear it at all? All right, then I don't care. Okay. You named some of the cases in the classic cases in which someone has to be reported. That someone's doing something terrible, and if someone is not reported, then they will hurt more people. Now, surely you can't expect that I would not be able to speak lashon hara about them. Is that really the problem? Is that really the prohibition here? Okay, so that brings us to. I'm sorry, I can't focus with the chainsaw. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. Chainsaw is just a little bit beyond my capacity. Okay, so I was just like so distracted for the last few minutes. So okay, so back to Joni's comments. Exactly right. Sometimes there are things that we have to say, and we have a communal responsibility to say them. So what do we do with that? And that takes us to the great exception. There's like the Chafetz Chaim writes an entire book on the subject of Lashon Hara, and again adjures us not to speak under any circumstances. But he has one exception. It's 10 chapters in, but it becomes very well known because it's such a it's such a broad exception that it certainly covers everything that Joni's talking about. And as you'll soon see, it seems to cover quite a lot more. Okay, and the exception is to'elet, which means benefit. If there is a benefit to what you're saying, then you are allowed to say it, and it in fact does not fall under the prohibition of Lashon Hara. So let's take a look at his mention, his elaboration on the concept of to'elet. So if Joni asks the question, what do you mean? I can't speak Lashon Hara about someone who is hurting children? I mean, and Joni asked the question, I think, with a certain amount of legitimate concern, because I think this ethic of not speaking evil can be used to justify covering up real harm. Right? Harm is covered up for all kinds of reasons, but now there's a religious justification for it. Okay. So he says, what about if this idea of intending benefit? What if you intend benefit? Okay. Sheyichaven l'to'elet. You intend benefit. So we shall explain. That is, if the people to whom he tells the story can help someone who was robbed or wronged or damaged or shamed, then it is certainly correct to do this to expose the perpetrator. Okay, so that's it. That's certainly, Joni asks the question and the Chafetz Chaim responds, yes, you're right. I wrote an entire book saying that you shouldn't speak ill, but everything you said, Joni, is true. You have to speak ill if it's going to help other people. Now, then he goes on, and this idea of benefit starts to get bigger. And even if this benefit cannot result through his telling, but his intent is that people distance themselves from the way of wickedness when they hear of it. You should just know, stay away from that guy. For people condemn doers of wrong. And perhaps he himself will repent through this of his evil ways. Maybe if you start telling everybody what a scoundrel this guy is, then he'll eventually get his act together and correct his deeds when he hears others condemning him, the offender, for this. Okay, so wait a minute now. That's gotten now it just seems like what was that last justification? If you think by spreading the gossip you will get, or spreading this isn't really gossip, this is Lashon Hara. This is like saying something that is denouncing, but is true, but your justification for it is you'll warn other people about it, or maybe you will get them to change their ways. That is considered a benefit, and you can speak Lashon Hara for that reason. In fact, it's not considered Lashon Hara. And he closes by saying that this is not in the category of Lashon Hara and is considered a benefit. And why? Here's Joni's exact point. Why? Since in any event, his intent is not to derive pleasure from this defect that he ascribes to his friend, but only to be zealous for the truth, that perhaps some future benefit will result. Okay. Now we're in very, I think, confusing territory, because, if you cannot say anything ever that is wrong about someone else, they're not wrong, but that is denouncing someone else. Okay, you can't ever do that unless you have some reason why you're doing it. And the only reason it seems like why you can't is if you're doing it because you enjoy it. Okay. It seems like almost any other reason is justified. Now, I'm not even sure I would. I'm not even sure how I feel about that exception. I mean, really, any other reason, just to force someone to shame them into repentance? That's a good enough reason. Okay. But then also, like, it completely hobbles the law. The only problem with any of this stuff is the way that we enjoy doing it. Okay. Is that really a big enough law? I mean, you can say anything you want about anyone, just don't enjoy it. Okay. So Joni's question, strong question, strong answer, but such a strong answer that now I'm wondering, well, what are we left with? What is forbidden and what should be permitted and what should be forbidden? Okay. So that's what we're dealing with here. Let's turn back now to folks who have more to say, to interpret here. I'll turn to Emily.
Hi, I'm boiling water, so I hope that doesn't, oh, now it stopped. It was like the chainsaw for a second. I just want to say I both fully support, and I was going to say a lot of what Joni said, so I'm very grateful that she said it. But I just want to insert the additional problem that often the sort of speak no evil is a rule because it protects people in power. Mm-hmm. And whisper networks among the powerless or the less powerful are often the only way that those people can achieve a measure of justice or achieve safety. Or so, I mean, it's like one thing Joni said that I would just add an asterisk to was, we know for a fact that the rabbi did XYZ, or it's been proven there's police are on it. More often than not, we don't know when the powerful have hurt, particularly not on a regular basis, the less powerful. So, and whisper networks are often what save people. So I'm just dropping that in there along with the other concerns. Okay, great.
Thank you for that. Emily echoes Joni's comments and echoes them in such a way that reminds us of the idea that we have to speak truth to power, right? Reminds me of something else that Joni alluded to that actually comes. I mentioned it at the outset, but we haven't mentioned it yet. Joni mentioned the mandate that we have in this tradition to rebuke, right? To actually speak out and call out when someone does something wrong. And actually, I took us through the whole sort of world of the Chafetz Chaim in order to get to this kind of paradox, this contradiction, where on the one hand you can never say anything wrong about anyone, but on the other hand you can do so for any good reason. It's like complete paradox. And I think some of that paradox or some of that tension is found even in the verses themselves, because now I'll just show you that the next verse, we've been looking at verse 16 in chapter 19 of Leviticus, which deals with gossip. The next verse, the very next verse, deals with, we had a prohibition against gossip. Now we have a mandate to rebuke. Okay. Now they're not exactly opposites, but you can feel that there's a certain opposing energy to them. So Joni mentioned it, and Emily mentioned speaking out against the powerful. Let's remember, with those comments in mind, let's remember the language that the Torah uses. Lo telech rachil be'amecha, lo tamod al dam re'echa ani Hashem. Don't go gossiping about your people. Don't stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. And then the next verse is lo tisna achicha bilvavecha, hocheach tochiach et amitecha. And you can hear the poetry again, right? Like that again, that just sort of like there's like that kind of rhythmic language. It's meant to be kind of memorized and turned into a kind of saying. Lo tisna achicha bilvavecha, hocheach tochiach et amitecha, velo tisa alav chet. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke, you shall rebuke your kin, and bear no sin on their account. Okay, there it is. Hocheach tochiach. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. Hocheach tochiach. Rebuke, you shall rebuke. And it's doubled that way. And that's the way the Torah tells us that this is really serious. You should rebuke someone. Rebuke someone. Now, what is that? Well, that turns into a whole other category of law, which is the mandate to speak out against someone when they're doing something wrong. Now, wait a minute. I mean, how can I have both these things be true? How can I have a responsibility to speak out against someone and also have a prohibition against saying anything bad about someone? And I guess the Chafetz Chaim has offered us one answer, which is that you have to be very careful to monitor yourself to see whether you're doing it really for a benefit or just for your own pleasure. And I said, that sounds like a tiny little thing. I go, really? That's the only thing this law in the Torah is prohibiting? But I actually think maybe the Chafetz Chaim would answer, oh, that's not a tiny thing at all. Because you would be surprised how much of the public chatter, the righteous public chatter, is actually taking place out of like a kind of lusty joy, a kind of pleasure, a delight in gossiping and in taking other people down. Okay. But some of it is going on because we desperately need, Joni put it this way, we rely on the public conversation in order to know reputation actually means something. And if someone's not good at going to be good at their job, or even someone you really shouldn't have around people in this way, we need to know that. Okay. But I think you can hear by now that the dilemma that we found in the Chafetz Chaim is actually a little bit, it's hanging there for us to resolve in the original language of the Torah itself, which tells us not to go running around gossiping and spreading, oh, guess what I heard, guess what I heard, guess what I heard, guess what I heard. But nevertheless tells us, but speak out and speak out in rebuke when someone is doing something wrong. Okay, all right. I think we have time for one more comment. Anyone feeling like this is the moment? Okay, Alexandra.
Thank you so much. I think this is a really important topic that we don't talk about enough, especially like in Jewish communities where we're trying to be unified. And I think there are a few things about the talebearing. Don't go talebearing about your about your people. I think it's about the importance of respecting privacy, loyalty, and respect of the sense of camaraderie and the what is told to you. Assume it's being told to you in confidence, and be loyal to each other and put on a united front. This is your people, and be aware of how you represent your people to your people. Assume it's told to you in confidence. And the same thing, it says rebuke your kin. It doesn't say publicly rebuke your kin, it says rebuke. And I think there's an element of respect privacy, respect what goes on, what you hear, what's told to you, respect it and keep it there. And if you have to rebuke someone, if you can rebuke them privately, if that's effective, maybe that's the first step. I think also you asked earlier, what's the problem with all of this? And I think the problem is, one of the many problems is we don't have clear strategies. In third grade in Orthodox Jewish day school, they told us it's a sin to hear Lashon Hara, walk away. And that's not really doable for third graders. We don't really have, that's all they said to us. There wasn't a culture of this. This wasn't repeated. This was one class. And as third graders, we're not gonna do that. And as humans, we're not gonna do that unless culturally, it comes from top down, and institutions institute no gossip policies and really define what that means, and really have these conversations and put them into you said it's not natural, and many years ago using a toilet wasn't natural. We can shift the culture, and we can shift the society to make like our like an elevated conversation become the more cultural norm. And I think that's so important.
Okay.
And I appreciate the topic.
This is exactly the right place to end, because Alexandra mentions, I think, a sort of critical distinction here, and Rashi mentions it as well, right? So you know you're on the right track, and that is the question of just how public or private the speech is. Okay, so we've now been reflecting on one way of distinguishing between what's allowed and what's not, and that is whether you take pleasure from it. But Alexandra asks us also just to think about what it means to be thoughtful about someone's privacy, even when we are needing to say the right thing. And I want to end by showing you that Rashi says the same thing here. Rashi says, "And bear no sin on their account." That was the end of rebuke. You shall rebuke your kin and bear no sin on their account. And why is that extra phrase there? And how would you bear sin on their account in the rebuke? So Rashi says, that is, do not publicly shame them. Literally whiten their face in public. In other words, rebuke them, but do it as privately as you can. Now, that's another form of calculation and consideration, because as Joni said, sometimes things need to be public, and the Chafetz Chaim said sometimes things need to be public. But I guess Rashi and I guess Alexandra is saying yes, but they only need to be as public as they need to be. And there's also a kind of a looseness and maybe even a pleasure in making things as public as possible. And that is also a prohibition. That is also something that we have to be careful for. So completely prohibited. So this is like the journey so far. We're completely prohibited to say anything negative about anyone. And then suddenly we walk it back by saying, well, unless there is a benefit. And then we wonder, given that huge exception, well, what is a benefit? What really constitutes a benefit? And the 2 points of consideration that we use to evaluate that are, well, are you getting pleasure out of this? And 2, are you keeping it in as closed a circle as you can and need to in order to affect the benefit that you are trying to affect? And that's really complicated stuff to think through. That's really, really difficult stuff to think through. But that's our Lashon Hara conversation. And as Alexandra said, at least we have a conversation, right? Because without having a conversation, without having some institution for processing, some mechanism for processing these issues, it's just we're all just third graders. We're just going to laugh at the gossip that we hear. That's only natural. So thank God for the Torah's complicated guidance. All right. Thanks for your patience through chainsaws and everything today. Good to see you all. Shabbat shalom.
Shalom. Thank you.
Bye.